Добрый день, уважаемые участники вебинара. И меня зовут Оля Лукьянова. Вы уже, думаю, знаете, чем я занимаюсь. Я руководитель кураторских служб факультетов дизайна и дизайна интерьера в Высшей школе «Среда, обучения». Сегодня мы продолжаем нашу серию лекций «Встреч вне границ». Это уже 6-я встреча по направлению дизайна. Встречи по направлению дизайна у нас проходят по четвергам после 19:00. Сегодня, например, у нас встреча в 20:30 по московскому времени. В общем, следите за расписанием на нашем сайте. А также встречи проходят по психологии и по дизайну интерьеров. Дизайн интерьеров – это у нас вчера, среда, вторники – это день психологии. Немножечко о спикере. Сегодня о поиске собственного стиля в иллюстрации нам расскажет Поли Бейкер. Работы Поли были опубликованы по всему миру и выставлялись на персональных и групповых выставках в США, Европе и даже на Ближнем Востоке. Она работает с пером, с чернилами и смоделированных по образу XVIII века гравюре на дереве. На протяжении большей части своей карьеры она продолжает педагогическую практику в школе дизайна Род-Айленда. Немножечко про регламент, да, на всякий случай повторим. Как всегда, 1,5 часа. На первом этапе мы послушаем Поли, это будет примерно час, и 30 минут это будет серия вопросов и ответов. Поэтому на протяжении всей лекции вы можете задавать вопросы, не стесняйтесь. Вот, понятное дело, что большая часть вопросов у вас возникнет уже в самом конце лекции, но все же пишите, самые интересные, а возможно все, я обязательно задам Поли, а Поли с удовольствием на них ответит. Также в процессе лекции вы можете задавать вопросы о среде обучения, о том, как нам поступить в наш сентябрьский набор. И я с удовольствием вам отвечу на эти вопросы. На этом все. Мое вступительное слово заканчивается. Всем спасибо и передаю слово Поле. Поле, здравствуйте.
Okay. Hello. Can everybody? Is this translation working? Seems like a. Okay, good. Thank you so much for having me. Very glad to be here. So I want to correct one little thing in the introduction. I do work in 2 different styles, both pen and ink. I don't actually do wood engraving. It's just that my pen and ink style imitates the style of the old-fashioned wood engravings. And then I also have an assemblage style. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okie dokie. So here I am with my assemblage supplies. I work in 2 different styles, as I said. One being this assemblage style using found objects, and the other being a pen and ink style that looks like this. I've been working for 3 decades as an illustrator. When I first started out, I went to school for illustration, and this on the left is the first piece that I was ever assigned professionally. It was for an advertisement about dental insurance, and that's the Tooth Fairy. It said, "But will she pay for X-rays?" I don't know if you guys have a tooth fairy in Russia, or if there's some other story you tell children about what happens to their teeth when they fall out. So this is the style that I learned to do in school and that I did for a long time professionally. I've always been sort of insecure about my drawing skills. So I try very hard to do a good job with drawing, I struggle with drawing. I feel like I need to do a lot of preparation and be very careful in order to do something that I feel is worthy of publication. I was very nervous when I was in my early 20s. I was very nervous to have my work published and felt like, maybe it wasn't good enough. I don't know. So this psychology caused me to try extra hard with pen and ink drawings. So what I would do is I would set things up sometimes as little desktop still lifes in order to make my drawings. I would make little sculptures almost photograph them and then draw from those photographs. And this is an example of a drawing that resulted from that kind of process. And that style, which is so time consuming, covering all these surfaces with so many little lines, and then having the lines also carry tonality. So the lines are trying to describe tonality, and they're trying to describe the shape of the object. And I was uncomfortable drawing people. By the time I'd been working for 15 years in this style, I really felt like I was trapped in a prison of my own making. And I was quite eager to find a new way of working, perhaps even to stop working as a commercial artist and start doing work that would be more like something you would see in a gallery. So I, in that mood of frustration with how tedious my work had become and how little I felt like I was able to express the ideas in my mind, I went out on the street on a walk. I'd also just ended a long relationship with somebody, and I was in my late 20s, and I was thinking, I'm never going to be the artist I want to be. I'm never going to have, a boyfriend, children. I was just so frustrated. And I looked out on the street, and there was this little broken piece of metal, and I picked it up and I brought it home. I made a sculpture out of it, like a person. And I said to myself, well, I guess that's my baby. I was very mad. And it turned out that kind of mood of frustration and anger led me to be a little bit freer and more experimental with the work I was doing. I thought to myself, maybe I don't want to be a commercial artist. I'll just try to do gallery work. But then it turned out I showed this work that I'd been doing. I put it on my walls, and I have a lot of friends who are designers. They saw it, and I showed it around to some other friends who were illustrators. And I said, could this be illustration? And people said, who were already doing illustration work more like what I wanted to do, they said, yes, this could of course be illustration. It was very unusual at the time to work three-dimensionally. And I got a lot of work, I think, from magazines and newspapers, doing work that was pretty conceptual, as opposed to doing work that was more like, had maybe more of a decorative function, what I was doing before. So I was able to work more with concepts. Like, for example, this was for an article about letting your children make their own decisions. And this was published on the cover of a poetry magazine. It was actually not something with a lot of conceptual content, but this kind of conceptual thinking, like, for example, this piece here, was to illustrate an article about gender stereotypes at the workplace. And this sort of is the game. Now, editorial illustration is what I love to do. It's work that gets published in magazines and newspapers. And the idea is that the work comes sort of with a point of view or a message or a set of ideas that it's trying to communicate. And so here I had to communicate gender, and two genders, but also the idea of work, and making that read, getting that to communicate the idea of work was the challenge of this piece. Here, I was illustrating a short story about a little girl who gets lost in the woods, and she is somehow changed by this experience, comes back different. But what I realized when I was doing this piece, and was still fairly early in my career, I entered this work into the competitions like American Illustration and Society of Illustrators. They have these juried professional competitions in the US. It actually won a medal from the Society of Illustrators. I think partly because it looked different from the work everybody else was doing, but also because I think I spent a long time on it. It was the process of a lot of revision. And it is often the case in the course of doing this kind of work that I settle on the pieces that I want to use, but I play with them for a long time before I finalize the arrangement. So I had all these pieces here, and I was playing with them for quite a while before I realized that these little blocks could be arranged to form a secondary figure in the middle of the primary figure. And I'm excited when I can get an illustration to achieve more than one reading at the same time, so that you can read this as a figure in a couple of different ways. If you choose to, you could see the head as belonging to the body that's on the blocks. or you could see it, you know, as a sculptural figure with those doll arms and legs. So I was very happy when I started doing this work because I could do work that was had more sort of personal content for me. I found a way to love my work in a new way, partly because I was already working with, I loved the things I was working with. A lot of these little objects I had around anyway, so when I could start using them for illustration, I was happy. And partly because I could work with subject matter that related to my own concerns. For example, this was a story about marriage, and right around the time I was getting married, I was asked to do a series of illustrations for an article about marriage by a pretty well-known American author in the Atlantic magazine. And here you see the idea was that they have to share, and neither one is really complete without the other. So I had a lot of ambivalent feelings about marriage. Like, I was scared to get married. I was scared that I might, you know, be whatever, I don't know, that I might be giving something up, or I don't know. And here I was asked to do an article about pregnancy, and it happened that I was pregnant at the time that I got that assignment. Sometimes I have sort of magical ideas associated with my work that maybe it's not an accident that people give me assignments that truly do relate to the things that I care the most about. But I actually think, so the article was saying pregnancy isn't so wonderful. It's, a lot of people talk about it, oh, it's so beautiful, it's so wonderful. But what really the author said, you know, it takes over your body, you know, it's weird, it's bizarre, you're growing another creature in your body, like that's weird. And so here again, they have to share a set of arms. And I had an idea also about a ship in a bottle, you know, those sculptures that I wanted people to look at this and say, how did that baby get in the bottle? Even though if you look at it for not very long, you can see that I cut the bottle to get her in. But I also think that the reason that I get assignments that relate to my own personal concerns is that people see the work and kind of unconsciously, because I'm working with things I love and because I'm trying to work kind of by instinct, I end up doing work that expresses not just the ideas that I'm supposed to be working with, but also sort of a mood that is particular to my own psychology. And so I think that the work expresses sort of a concern with like, I don't know, but you know, here was a story about I was supposed to illustrate the 7 deadly sins. So this is one of the 7 deadly sins is the sin of sloth, which you could translate as laziness, but in a way, the idea of disorder and letting things fall apart seems to me, like being messy, seems to me to relate to depression. So I decided to secretly make this piece about feelings of sorrow and depression. And then I thought, well, how does that feel? Like, I don't know if you've heard of method acting. It's an American school of thought about dramatic acting, which is that you access, in order to play a part, in order to pretend to be feeling a certain thing, you remember something you really did feel. And so even though your character is maybe crying because his grandmother died, you can remember a time that your dog died and still access the same true emotion. So I play that kind of game with my work. And so I decided, you know, so how does depression feel? It feels heavy. It feels like time is slipping away, like you're doing nothing and time is passing. So the sand sort of represents time and the broken trailing glass. And she's sort of like just in this gesture. And I was also inspired by Albrecht Dürer, the famous German artist who drew that famous rhinoceros, had a series of different, I don't know what they actually were, but this was about melancholy. And I thought about that image a lot when I was doing this one. So one way or another, I try to find a way to care about my work as a way of just trying to make it better. It's trying to sort of like invest love and care into it. So here, Oh, well, here's a story. This was for an article about, it was called Politics as Theater, and another series of images that was part of. This was, I also, another way that I try to care about my work is to try to, use the work as an excuse to do things I want to do anyway. I'm really interested in textiles and embroidery and women's work, like sewing. I love that stuff. I think the idea of women's work in general is so interesting, and I'm really curious about the line where art and craft kind of intersect. So anyway, so I love handicrafts, and I applied to a magazine that was not a famous magazine and asked if I could work for them because it was called Sewing Magazine, and I wanted to do sewing projects. And they gave me a project that was called Sew Frugal, which is sort of a play on words, meaning sewing when you don't have a lot of money to spend on materials. So here's a dollar bill, and here's a little. I made this character for a still photo, but then I made a little animation for it.
And I was like, no, I lost 25 pounds, you idiot. But I felt, and then there was something.
The reason that she's tightening her belt there is that in American, there's an expression for trying to save money. You call it tightening the belt. So she's sewing on a budget, and that's why she's got a tiny waist and she's tightening her belt. This was a piece about menopause, and I love these kind of assignments where they just give you, I didn't even have to read the article. This was for Time magazine. And it was just the titles. It was a cover story on menopause, and they just gave me that one word. And so I decided how I'd show that was that, in menopause, there's an interruption, a transition that is between one thing and another thing. So I made there be an interruption in the middle of the body there. And of course, time. I like working with these sort of puppet-like figures, and I like working in shallow relief, but the style, this assemblage style, is flexible. So I can do something more sculptural if I choose to. And I don't have to do, the rule I've made for myself is that it doesn't always have to be a figure or a puppet. But even when it's not an actual human figure, of course, this sort of silhouette, like the shape of the image on the page, is a primary concern. And in English, we have this word figure, which means, your body. It can mean a human figure. It can also mean almost like a design, like a design or a shape that has a shape that has a sort of a design to it is called a figure also. So everything's a figure for me. Generally, it's just one shape, and I pay a lot of attention to that outline. That edge where there's negative space around the figure is very, very, very important to both my styles, so that when I'm doing this scratchboard work, it's called scratchboard, it's basically like a shape that is filled in with texture. And when I'm doing this style, it's the same thing. It's basically a shape that's filled in with detail. So the primary concern is that shape. This actually was for a magazine called Shape Magazine. It's about women's fitness, and it was a story about how terrible American eating habits are. I hope Russian eating habits aren't as bad as American eating habits. Anyway, so and I'm quite interested in the possibility, even though I haven't done much animation with this work. They are very puppet-like, so there is the potential, at least conceptually, there's the potential for movement. And in this piece and in this piece, I've been asked to do illustrations for a large-scale kinetic sculpture festival that was happening in a certain town on the west coast of the United States. They have a festival every year where people make large-scale kinetic sculptures, and they hadn't had that festival yet. This was for the publicity, so they just invited me to make some kinetic sculptures, and that was a fun idea for me. I really am inspired by the idea that these figures could somehow be alive and somehow move, even though they're still images. This was for a story about another story about eating habits. It's about diet fads, so trends and styles of different kinds of diets. Like for a while in America, there was a diet where you ate only meat. There's some diets where you eat a lot of carbohydrates or just vegetables. And so, of course, I just am always looking for excuses to do what I actually want to do, which is like playing with dolls. Anyway, so I made these little clothes and these little miniature hangers, and this figure, she's very thin, you see, because she's been dieting. It's about a decade of diet fads, so she's been dieting for 10 years, and she's very thin. Here was a British illustration magazine called Vroom, which for you illustrators out there, that's a great magazine. Very thoughtful and nice. They did a series. They hired me to do one of it. They hired 12 different illustrators to do what they were calling 21st century astrology of anxiety. And so I got I'm always feeling very lucky when I get this kind of assignment. I got assigned the sign of fear. So here I'm depicting, and I tell myself, I fantasize and make up these little stories as I'm working. And my story for this piece was that she's a wealthy woman. She's afraid of losing her wealth. And so here's a piece I did for the cover of a magazine called Poets and Writers magazine. And they do an issue every year on the subject of inspiration. And that's kind of a hard assignment for somebody who worries as much as I do about whether I'm doing a good job or not a good job. I was a little nervous about doing a project about inspiration because I thought, what if I don't have a good idea? You know, what if I'm not inspired? What if I'm not capable of, embodying this idea of inspiration? And I thought, well, there's such a cliche, the idea that a light bulb would be a symbol of an idea. And I tried, so I said, well, I'm certainly not going to do a light bulb, about an article about inspiration. And I tried and I tried and I tried to have another idea, but I couldn't. And so I just decided to try to make the light bulb idea okay. I mean, sometimes these metaphors that are cliches for a reason. And the idea of a light, coming on, it's not a bad metaphor for brain activity. And I'm trying to make her seem like she loves her idea. So I spent a lot of time trying to get a sense that she was sort of almost cradling this and a sort of a loving feeling, a positive feeling of caring. And this was for an article. This is a little bit more of one of these kind of ideas that is more like an intellectual idea than something. I prefer to come to my conceptual solutions through a process of feeling and using intuition and not necessarily using like the front and top of my brain to like solve it like it's some kind of puzzle. But here it was a story about a transgender man who felt so excited when he got to start wearing men's clothes and stop wearing women's clothes. A cage is another cliche, but I kind of hate to use cliches, but sometimes I do, and I just try to make them a little different. This was another article that I got asked to illustrate about gender transition. And here they said, try to make it feel very positive. And somehow when they tell me to try to do something, then I'm always like, then I get obsessed with the opposite. And I'm thinking, oh, it looks too sad. It looks too sad. It looks too sad. And it does, but there's actual sunlight in this picture. So maybe that feels a little more positive, and some color. This one doesn't have a lot of conceptual, well, actually, it was actually an illustration for a Mozart opera and they reused the image, but sometimes it's nice just to do something where you like and care about the materials for their own sake, and you stop thinking so much about the conceptual thing and start, it's almost like you can get a little distracted by the ideas, and you have to remember to care about just how it looks and feels. and these objects looked and felt nice together to me. This was for an article about a big band with like 40 people in it for an entertainment magazine. And so I made them be like a multi-legged monster. A lot of times with this style, a lot of times I reject the computer and I just make everything by hand. And so there was absolutely zero computer digital imaging done. Sometimes I spend so long doing digital corrections and adjustments and using digital magic to do things and trying to make them look real, which I kind of like to try to be truthful and honest when I'm working in as many different ways as I can. So I'm always a little ambivalent with a heavily photoshopped project like this one was. But it was a piece of historical fiction, but it was based on a real character who I was not allowed to use her photograph. She was a famous blind woman from the 1800s. And I had to sort of cobble together a bunch of different references to create. And she wore this black bandage over her eyes, which made her very hard to paint, to draw also, because the face carries a lot of humanity in my work. And so if I can't show the face, that's hard. I spent a long time in Photoshop on this project, but I kind of like it anyway. I've been doing this assemblage style for so long that this has also started to almost feel like a prison to me too, because you want to be spontaneous and have, be inspired in the moment to do the work. And if you're doing something that is basically like repeating yourself, intuitively, there's something wrong if you're using the same tricks again and again and again, or if you know what's going to happen when you start working, like that's not good either. So I'm happy I got asked to do some unusual things also. Like I got asked to do a project in the Middle East, which is what this was, where they had me fly to Dubai. They had me create a bunch of work, and then they exhibited the work in an old mosque in Bastakia, which is the part of the port section of Dubai, as part of the Art Dubai art fair. And these women who are just like ultra rich women, Lebanese women, had flown me there. They had a fashion boutique and they wanted to publicize their fashion boutique with this art show. So they said to me, create work that is like bling. You know the word bling? Like sparkles. It sparkles like jewels and sparkly things. Pretty, 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 they said. And so I tried to create work that responded to that. And they and their friends bought everything that I exhibited. It was a really, really fun thing to do. And then this is another sort of random project that happened. The internet brings me interesting opportunities sometimes. And a Japanese fashion designer in Osaka said she had seen my work on the internet somewhere and wanted to take my imagery and combine it together to create textiles and base her fall line of clothing around some of my imagery. So she did that, and then she sent me samples of everything, which happened to be my size, so that was nice. Love these boots and the umbrella. And this is a more recent project, so I haven't stopped. I still do both styles. I still do the pen and ink work. And I did these images for a German department store called Breuninger that hires a different illustrator every year to illustrate their Christmas campaign. And they have their logo is a bear, so they had me do bears. This was very heavily art directed. This was a really hard project. It took about 4 months, just nonstop, hard work. I think it was just too much work for one person to do. And again, I was spending a lot of time in Photoshop. I would feed these, because these things were exhibited very large, and this is a chain of stores. So they were putting the imagery into the windows. I don't know if I have that. They were putting imagery into the windows of all their stores across Germany, and these huge murals. So I was really scared about the line quality. So I was working as large as I possibly could, which is, so bad for this style, and it's already so time consuming. So, I mean, to do a pen and ink mural it's crazy. That's crazy. It was hard. And I didn't love the work either because it's a little bit sweeter than I like my work to be. Like I like my work to match my own kind of psychology. And this was they kept telling me, we want people to experience joy when they look at these things. And I had honestly, like I had never thought of trying to I never thought of trying to make somebody experience joy when they looked at something. So I was like, wow, that's not a bad idea, actually. I just hadn't thought of it. So they were telling me to do some things like put them in jewelry and I don't know. This is a lot of labor, basically. And I feel that way still with the pen and ink work. You know, it's just this project. Yeah, I have a representative in France. I don't have representation in America, but one time when the exchange rate was really positive to the dollar, I decided I would try to get representation in Europe. And so my French representative, she gets me these projects that are so hard. And I had to illustrate this whole book about beards, which sounds fun, but they were telling me exactly how everybody needed to be dressed. And this again, I mean, beards. It was different styles of beards. Yeah. Yeah, so they would say every piece of clothing there was specified. They told me, and in French, which I don't really speak very well, so I was desperately searching the dictionaries to try to understand what they were saying. So I have this tendency to just make things harder than they need to be, I think. And after a while, you know, I want my work to be free and spontaneous and not repeat itself. But it's so easy when you're a commercial artist to fall into these places where there is a lot of repetition because people see something that you did in the past and they say, well, you know, do that again. But artistically, I think we all know, like repeating yourself, it's not always a good idea. So I've been doing a lot of experimentation lately with two-dimensional work that is, you know, utilizing different experimental processes. And so what I'm going to start showing you is more recent work that I've just been sort of trying different things to see what maybe I could try as a new way of working. And here are some illustrations that I did for I don't know what to call that. It's a hotel, let's say, in New York City. It's sort of like a club. It's called the Harvard Club of New York. And they wanted images of the Charles River, which is in Boston, where I live. And so I know the Charles River well. I've lived here a long time. So I basically, this is almost like a way of doing almost photo translations. So everything here was drawn and painted by hand, but it's layers and layers and layers in Photoshop, almost like embroidery. I don't even know if that was a successful experiment, but it's being exhibited. It's now on the walls in this place. So I did it for that. It's different for me, it's always nice if somebody asks you to do something you haven't done before. I'm very grateful for those opportunities. This is just something, this is done on like photo paper with a lot of dyes and inks that don't come off so that I have a tendency to sort of fuss and revise things a lot. So again, like I'm trying to get to a place where I can work more spontaneously, and that I did very quickly and with a lot of like commitment to each step, not knowing what was going to happen. Again, this is also very improvisational. I'm transferring, I was drawing with a pen on, I want to say saran wrap. It's like clear film that you use in the kitchen to wrap things up when you put them in the refrigerator. And so I drew on that and then touched it to a piece of paper, and it made those kind of dotted lines, and then I painted back into it. And this is with no planning. This is a painting on glass. Just another kind of attempt at finding a way to work from photographs that's a little bit different. This is very, very small painting on glass. This is also a very small painting on glass of my dog. He's probably in the background here. And I just backed it with another piece of paper that had just a big brush stroke on it. And this started with painting on glass. And then you can see like underneath the glass, there's a book a little bit. You can see the pages of the book. And that chair was an illustration in the book. then I took the whole thing into Photoshop and did some stuff to it. And this one. The chair was chair. So this was an art book of like Japanese art that I had, and I painted on glass, and then I put the glass on top of the book and took, just an iPhone photo. And then I brought that into Photoshop and made digital adjustments to it. And it's actually a portrait of an author. And I submitted that, and this piece, which I did at the same time, which also started with painting with ink on glass and paint, and then also has some elements of digital collage. These two pieces I submitted to American Illustration, which is a competition I enter every year, and they both got in. And I was really happy because it's different for me. And, and somebody said, thumbs up, I like that. So this, yeah, and then this is, I'm almost to the end here. These are what's on my wall right now. Right now, I'm getting ready to participate in a group show, which is a fine art show in Chicago. And I've just gotten some gallery representation, and I'm going to start. I hope that I'm going to start a new phase of my career where I do more fine art and do more sculpture work to be sold as physical pieces instead of just to be reproduced as photographs, as commercial art, as illustration. So all three of these are about to get packaged up and shipped to Chicago. And here we are at the very end. So that's the end. And I'm trying to stop the share, but okay. Okay, so now, if anybody has questions, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Оля, вопросы есть. Это было очень вдохновительно. Да, хочу сказать, что наши слушатели отметили вообще ваш прекрасный стиль. Мне кажется, я такого вообще никогда в жизни не видела. Это очень круто, и видно, как вы любите то, чем вы занимаетесь. Это спасибо вам огромное за то, что пришли к нам. И, собственно, первый вопрос.
I try to love it. Sometimes I love it, and sometimes I hate it. And most of the time, I'm extremely anxious and unhappy when I'm working. Every now and then I have a little bit of fun. But I try to love it because I think it's important to care.
Получается, что вы ищете в своей работе в первую очередь смысл. То есть вы не работаете просто так, потому что вам это нравится.
I think that it is important to try to communicate something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an idea. I think work that communicates a feeling, engages a viewer just as much, if not more, than work that communicates a conceptual idea. But with illustration, you're supposed to, with the way I do illustration, with editorial illustration, the best editorial illustration does communicate ideas. They give you an article and they say, come up with some kind of image that has the same sort of idea as the writing.
Поля, расскажите вообще про свой стиль. Как вы к нему пришли, как вы его нашли, как так случилось, что вам пришла идея вот вообще, что можно работать именно так? Это выглядит очень необычно.
Well, when I first started working, I was just super concerned with trying to be good in the sense of like, good girl, pat on the head, like, we're paying you, you did a good job. I was very, very just thinking, I just want to do what people want me to do. I think especially as a woman, there's this eagerness to please. and this anxiety about whether you'll please somebody else. And so I worked hard at craft initially. And it was only when I got it was only when I got to feel like very frustrated that I stopped trying to have good craft. and I tried a new way of working where I could just be spontaneous, because what's really, I mean, the more I think about it, because I teach, I have been spending a lot of time in the past. Well, I've always taught a lot, and so I've always sort of thought about the creative process. Now, what I know about the creative process is that one of the most fun things that can happen in the creative process is when you get surprised and you don't know what's going to happen. I spent a long time making drawings that I had to plan out for a long time in advance and prepare with studies and try to be very faithful to visible reality. And when that got to be feeling like a trap or a prison, then I tried to find a way of working where I could be more engaged in the moment, just like a musician wants to be engaged. You know, you want to not know what's going to happen when you start, because how boring. Like, you know, what if you were playing tennis and you were like, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'll hit the ball into that corner, then you hit it back to me, you know, but with a little spin, and then I'll just run back and then but I'll do it with it. You know, you would never plan out that game beforehand. It would be terrible. So you couldn't even do it. So now my theory is set up kind of a sandbox where you can play. You have some toys. You think with your intuition, maybe something good will happen with those toys. And then you play and play until something does happen. And then you try to notice when something happens. And then you do something in response to what happens. And then you do something in response to what happens when you do something else. And so it is a process of like, you step forward not knowing what's going to happen, and then step forward more and more and more. That actually is fun. That actually is exciting. That actually is amusing and engaging for the artist as well. I can't always make that happen, but I'm always trying to make that happen. What was I going to say? That anyway. So I'm still trying to arrive somewhere. I think that I have a tendency to be very anxious and nervous, and I try to play it safe. So I have repeated myself a lot. I'm showing you guys my favorite projects, but I've done a lot of projects that are using the same kit of parts and didn't work out that well because, you know, sometimes it's boring and sometimes it's bad and sometimes I don't like what happens. And so I have managed to find a way to make my spontaneous, supposedly fun work hard. And now I'm trying to find a way back to some other spontaneous and fun work. And I don't know if I'll be able to or not. It's fun to be able to. I'm glad about the, you know, collage is interesting because you can throw a bunch of different kinds of stuff into collage. Like it can absorb drawing, painting, found objects. You know, it can absorb a lot of different things that are of interest to me. So. But I mean, I will say that I you know, it's hard being an illustrator. I don't know how many of these students are illustrators. Like, am I speaking to an entire art school, or am I speaking to an illustration program?
Да, да, конечно, есть. Даже я их вижу, это именно мои студенты, которые учатся именно иллюстрации. То есть будущие иллюстраторы здесь есть точно, которых я знаю.
Okay, but it's not just an illustration program.
Да, конечно. Да, все заинтересованные, все, кому откликнулась тема, они слушают нашу лекцию, нашу встречу.
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. So the challenge is, you know, finding somebody to hire me to do what I want to do, and marketing and being freelance is hard. You know, I'm making it sound like it's all fun and games, but you know, if you don't send out promotional pieces, if you don't advertise yourself, you know, things can get a little quiet and the phone stops ringing or the email stops pinging or whatever. So I have a little trouble with that aspect of it. Are there other questions?
Конечно. Как вы понимаете, что работа закончена? Вот что все, вот ее нужно положить и больше не трогать.
Yeah, I have a little trouble with that. Well, I'll play with these things forever. Sometimes I play with them so much, and I forget to document what I'm doing. You know, I have to keep taking photos when I'm working with assemblage because the pieces change quite a bit. I'm revising. I just revised a piece I did 20 years ago. I'll play with them forever if I'm allowed to. It's good to have deadlines. Deadlines can be your best friend. It's very helpful because those puppet-like pieces have a lot of moving parts. So getting them to the point where I settle on one position for them. I almost don't want to settle. I almost want them to still be able to move. So I don't always know when something's done.
Это супер. А вот вам вот чувствуется, что вы безумно творческий человек, и вам, как творческому человеку, сложно ли организовать свой рабочий день и успевать все к дедлайну? Вот есть ли у вас с этим какие-то лайфхаки?
I have no advice. I hope everyone's a lot more organized than I am. It's important. I mean, you don't have to be disorganized to be a good artist. I know I have friends who are wonderful artists and they're also, you know, very businesslike and very organized. And you know, it's just a personality trait, but I don't have all I have is sympathy and empathy for those of your students who have trouble in that area, because I do too. I do always meet my deadlines though. I'm never late with work. I finish work early. I try to leave extra time. I tell myself that something's due several days before it is, if at all possible. I do finish things early. I'm disorganized in lots of areas, but I definitely always meet my deadlines because I rely on repeat business. You know, I really am. My work may look like fine art in some way, but I really am a commercial artist, and I really do need those relationships with my clients to be very positive. And I try to be a lot of fun to work with. I try to be very pleasant. I'm very friendly with my clients, and I always do my work on time, and I always try to do a good job. So I may not pay all my bills on time, but I do turn in all of my assignments on time.
Среди кого именно вот популярны ваши иллюстрации? Пометка от нашего слушателя, что ваши иллюстрации восхитительны, это он задал этот вопрос. И среди детей, там, взрослых или какой-то определенной группы творческих людей?
Yeah, I've been told that my work is not for children. I've never really done a whole lot of work for children, although I love children. I think that a lot of women connect with my work because of the themes. You know, I think that it's when you can work by instinct and when you can work intuitively. A lot of your own personal themes emerge seemingly by accident. And so people who share my kind of way of thinking are the people who tend to respond to my work. And I don't, you know, I don't have, I mean, I have a lot of male clients, but I think some of my work has a special, you know, something special to say to women because because I care about women's issues so much, and because my concerns, some of my concerns are particularly feminine concerns. And then I get a lot of work. I'm employed by so many different schools in so many different ways. I work for a lot of schools. And one of the ways that happens is through teaching, but another way is because a lot of the magazines I work for are alumni magazines, like magazines produced by universities or magazines that I read myself. Like, you know, the magazines I like to read are the ones who tend to hire me. So even though my work is completely nonverbal, I do tend to attract people like me who read a lot and think a lot. And so I've realized over the years that when somebody calls me with an assignment, they're almost already a friend, you know. If they like, my work's not for everybody. You know, it's a lot of people find it sad and shabby looking, like poor looking or something. I don't know, like not everybody these days, a lot of work has to work well on a phone, you know. A lot of what's popular right now in illustration is, you know, bright colors, very graphic. A lot of it, you can't even see the hand in the work. You know, a lot of people are working digitally these days. So my work is not in the mainstream at all right now. I've been surprised by how much mainstream work I have managed to get, honestly. Like when I first started doing the assemblage work, I had no idea people would hire me to do it. And I was delighted when they did. So I think it's not a bad place to be artistically if you're making something because you want to do it and because you care about it. I've learned, and I wouldn't have known this beforehand, but I've learned that if you make something to please yourself, even if it seems like it's weird and you don't know what other people are going to think of it, it's more likely that somebody else will like it if you like it. You know, I think that it's a good sign if you kind of feel like you like what you're doing, or you're like, this seems right. You know, if you experience a little bit of joy in the making of something, you're more likely to communicate some kind of joy to the viewer, some kind of enjoyment to the viewer. If you're working and you're bored, or you're feeling like, you know, I think boredom is like refusal. So I think if you're working and you're bored and you feel like kind of a slave to your own initial idea, that's a bad sign. And you should probably just change it up, you know, stop what you're doing, try something different. Because I think that when you pay attention to your feeling state when you're working, you can get important clues about how the work is going. So, I mean, obviously people say that, you know, if you're in a flow state, if you lose track of time, that's a good sign. If you're having fun, that's a good sign. If you sort of feel like the project has taken on a life of its own, that's a good sign. But if you're bored and frustrated and unhappy, you might need to change something. You can't just keep beating your head against the wall, even though I spent a lot of time beating my head against the wall anyway. So that's my advice.
Мгм. Поля, а скажите, а вам вот больше удовольствия, смотря на свою работу, вы испытываете, когда вы понимаете, что в ней много смысла, или, то есть, есть что-то такое глубокое, или когда вы понимаете, что она вот очень красивая и эстетичная работа?
I know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know from experience that when the work needs to do something, when it has something that it has to communicate, that's a good discipline. That's a good thing. When you have something that you're trying to get across to a viewer, that's good. So I think the most gratifying thing is when I've had some kind of little idea in my mind that I don't realize is communicating itself to a viewer. And then somebody I've never even met sees the work and reads the same thing into it that was in my mind. And then it's like, ping, you connect with somebody you never even met. Like the idea goes from your mind into the project, into their mind. That's that almost feels like a miracle to me. I'm very surprised when that happens and very happy. One time somebody said, "Oh, I think your work is funny." And I liked that too, because sometimes I do think something's a little funny when I'm working, and I put something in that, like, I like it when things are funny myself. So if I could make my work be funny, like I like, or fun, like that would be, I don't know that I ever look at my work and think, "Oh, that's beautiful." Like I never, think that. I'm more like, is it okay? Is it not okay? Is it okay? I'm not thinking, "Oh, beauty has happened." No. I worry that it's not beautiful enough. Sometimes I think, I wish I could make things and other people would be like, "Oh, beautiful." But
Поля, когда перед вами чистый лист, как вы начинаете свою работу? Какие обычно у вас мысли? Есть ли какой-то определенный порядок действий в голове?
It really depends. Like, I'm not consistent about that. And I do work for fun. I do a lot of personal work. And so when I see a blank sheet, the thing to do is just do something to it so that then you have something to react to. Try to just put something on that page so that you're not so scared of the blankness. But with illustration assignments, I do sketching and thumbnails. I make little tiny pencil sketches, but sometimes I don't start with that. Sometimes I just start with arranging objects until it seems to be telling something like the story I want. So sometimes I don't sketch at all. So sometimes I don't work with paper. It depends. It really depends. I'm not consistent with that.
Поля, скажите, а у вас есть вот любимые работы, которые при этом не стали успешными, и наоборот, работы, которые вам, честно, не нравятся, но при этом они стали, выстрелили, стали пушкой и приобрели много успеха?
No, I think that the pieces that have been the most successful actually are the best ones, and I don't always know what is going to be good while I'm working on it. It's very, very hard, and no matter what kind of designer you are, I think it's very, very hard to see, when you look at your work, to see what other people would see, to know what other people would see. So I think the thing is to just try to make a lot of work according to, your own standards. Try to make work that you can like, if possible. And then later you'll find out which stuff was good and which stuff wasn't good. I don't think that you can know. So I do get very influenced. If other people like a piece, I get very influenced and think maybe it's good. So I don't know. But I mean, because of the nature of being an illustrator, most of the pieces that I've made that have had success, have seen the light of day and done well, later maybe got accepted to competition, or that a lot of people have, reacted positively to, that saw it. There's a sort of like, I just find out how it's received when I put it out there. And then I have a lot of work that I make that nobody ever sees, and I have no idea if it's any good or not. So I guess it's important to show people work so that you can know if it's good or not.
Поля, вот то, что вы делаете, это очень похоже на искусство. То есть это точно, это 100% искусство, но при этом вы называете себя иллюстратором. Скажите, а чем, по вашему мнению, художник отличается от иллюстратора? Как эти понятия разносятся именно в вашей голове?
Okay, so in this day and age, I mean, the best illustrators do work just as smart and just as amazing as the best, like painting has become very narrative. We don't, abstract art isn't as popular now. What's really acclaimed in the art world today, in the fine art world, is mostly narrative work, figural work. And that's, what illustrators have always done. So there's a lot of illustrators who show their work in galleries, and a lot of gallery art that looks to me like illustration. Like I don't I think what's different is the function of the work in society. So illustration exists to be applied to something else. Illustration is going to be printed in a magazine or a newspaper, or it's going to appear on a t-shirt, or it's going to be used for wallpaper, or it's going to appear on a soda can, or it has a function that is to help, well, and not to help, but like it's how it's used. And a lot of illustrators who are my favorite illustrators try to make work that can both be rich and good as art and answer the demands of a particular assignment. When I was in school and I studied illustration in school, I thought to myself, everybody at the time I was in school, people were doing a lot of like very rendered, time-consuming, sort of realistic-looking drawings. That was the style that was popular. People were working in pastels. I was looking at what I was doing in school and what the other students were doing, and I thought, well, I definitely don't want to do this. I was like, I guess an illustration is just an overworked drawing. So a drawing somebody overworked for 30 hours. But then I realized actually illustration could be really cool and fun. After I got some teachers who were practicing illustrators, and they weren't just professional teachers. And I saw their work and I liked their work, and I thought, oh, so you can be cool and be an illustrator. So I had to get over some negative stereotypes about illustration in order to realize that I love illustration. I love it. But it sometimes I don't know. I think that the best illustration should be art. And there's a lot of lousy, and it's not like fine art isn't also commercial, and it's not like fine art is always more fine. But it's harder to get rich as an illustrator. Like a really good illustrator can make good money, but a so-so illustrator just makes so-so money. So it's a hard profession. I love print media, and print media is kind of not as popular as it was. So illustration assignments there's a lot of competition for the best illustration assignments, and you really have to be good. To be very dominant in this field, you have to be very good.
Поля, скажите, как вы думаете, современный иллюстратор должен уметь рисовать от руки или достаточно знаний графических редакторов?
I don't think you really need to draw that well to be an illustrator, especially these days. I think drawing. Hang on. I think drawing is great. I'm sad that people don't draw as much. Like I said, illustration is getting very graphic these days. And of course it's very digital. So I I'm sorry that people don't have beautiful handwriting anymore, and I'm sorry that people don't draw anymore. And I think that people who can draw well command respect, and I think that people who draw well now, maybe it's unusual, and maybe you can get work because you can draw well. I think drawing's really hard. I think drawing requires a lot of courage and practice. And I love drawing, and I love it when people draw well. And I get sad when I see bad drawing. But if you don't draw well, I think that there are workarounds. I think that you can still be a good illustrator even if you don't draw well. I think that I do these assemblages partly because I was uncomfortable with drawing and frightened by drawing. It's a different way of drawing for me. So no, I mean, if you don't draw well and you have something to communicate, you can still be an illustrator. You can work with what you have. I don't mind naive or clumsy drawing either. I just like people to just draw how you draw, I just don't like it when people try to seem like they're drawing better than they are. I just want people to be honest about how well they draw. And drawing is great. So if you can draw well, keep drawing.
Здорово. Поля, где вы ищете предметы для ассамбляжа? Ищете ли вы их заранее или, имея идею, отправляете то есть уже с идеей отправляетесь на поиски предметов?
I do both, but what I often find is that it's a nice discipline to just work with what I have, to force the things that I do have to tell the stories that I want to tell. I've always collected a lot of old things, and so I have a lot of materials here. And sometimes I need something very particular and I go out looking for it. And eBay, I can find a lot of stuff on eBay too. But it's also, it's good to have some limitations. And sometimes I'm surprised how much I'm able to do just with what I have on hand, and forcing the things that I do have to work can be good artistically. So I don't often go out looking for something in particular.
А что самое неочевидное вы использовали для своих работ?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm just drawing a blank. It's tricky working. Some things are so powerful. Some things are so powerful that they're hard to use. And one time I made a werewolf out of those things people wore in the olden days around their necks. They were like mink, and then you would have the little dead feet of the mink. Like it's like a mink stole. It's called, like it's like you would wear it like a collar, but it was really made from a dead animal. And they would sometimes have their little heads and the feet still on the thing. And I used those feet and that fur to make a werewolf for a story about some people who there was a legend about werewolves or something. So I made this like monster, and I was really a little uncomfortable with using the actual like taxidermied feet of this dead animal in a project, but it's okay. But that's so strong. Like that's so strong that when you're doing assemblage, you don't want any one thing to like stick out too much, like seem more important than everything else. So some things are very powerful and they're hard to use because they're so powerful, like a skull or a dead foot of an animal. So or, you know, bones. I've never used a bone. Anyway, yeah. But the kids were always guarding their toys when when my kids were young. And my husband sometimes tells me, "Don't use this for a collage." You know, he's still mad about this one expensive pen that I took apart, turned into a project. So.
Это очень забавно, Поля. Скажите, а вот...
Yes, yes, yes. Well, it's 100 degrees in Boston today. You can see I'm so pink because it's so hot here.
Ничего страшного. У нас в Москве только-только спала жара и начался дождь. Вот последние
really?
дни очень плохо, тяжело, очень тяжело.
Yes.
Думаю, что... Наверное, я бы сейчас выбрала жару. Так, ладно, не будем отвлекаться от темы. Следующий вопрос, Поле.
Yes, well, yes.
Следующий вопрос. Вот вы выставлялись по всему миру, можно сказать, во многих странах. Есть ли у вас наблюдение, в каких странах ассамбляж лучше воспринимается и вызывает больше интереса? Потому что это довольно неочевидный вид иллюстрации. Нет?
No, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer to that would be. I mean, it's been popular. The Surrealists really started. I think that's started in Europe, but I've certainly had the most assignments from the U.S.
Мгм. Скажите, вот у иллюстратора, который вообще работает с выставками, у него больше свободы, чем у простого коммерческого иллюстратора? Вообще, какие плюсы, какие минусы есть?
Well, I am very grateful to have been asked to illustrate things that were so specific and conceptual. I think that without my assignments, you know, without somebody saying, "Oh, make something about, you know, gender stereotypes at the workplace. Make something about this story about somebody who's, you know, had lost a child," or whatever. Like, you know, these stories that I get asked to illustrate, they give me ideas. The ideas come partly from the assignments. And I'm very glad to have that, you know, to be asked to do certain things. And it's a lot like being a student, because when you're a student, you get assignments, and sometimes you feel like the assignments are, you know, trying to make you do something very particular that you wouldn't necessarily want to do on your own. You know, sometimes the assignments can feel like a straitjacket, you know, like confining. So you have to find a way to answer the assignment and do what you like and what you want to do. You know, you have to do work that satisfies somebody else's expectations as a student, while still finding a way to care about it for your own reasons. And that dance is something that illustrators, you know, editorial illustrators who work conceptually are always doing. So I get asked to do boring assignments, you know, something like, oh, you have to withdraw your money from the bank in this certain way, and there's this story about something I just don't care about at all. And I have to find a secret other story for my own mind to tell myself while I'm working, so that I can, you know, have any kind of fun. And that's, you know, learning to do that has been probably the main project of my professional life. And learning to do that for you students is probably going to be the main project for you as students, you know. balancing your expectations and your assignments with your actual impulses and the things you care about. So I think that the challenge is a little bit different for the fine artist to develop a set of communicative themes and ideas to make the work about. I think at this point in my life, I could maybe do that, but I don't think I could have done it in my 20s or 30s. I just think I needed that structure, or I wouldn't have known what to do. So I really needed to get my career going before my work could develop, because otherwise I think I might just sit around and hesitate, try something, but not really commit, or, like having those deadlines and those assignments made me productive, and I wouldn't necessarily have been very productive without them. If you have good self-discipline, it's different.
Оля, вы удивительный человек. На самом деле, я смотрю на комментарии в чате, и очень многие люди вами прям восхищаются. Да.
Good,
У нас осталось...
Thank you.
У нас осталось не так много времени, поэтому давайте я вам задам последние 2 вопроса и будем прощаться с нашими слушателями.
Okay.
Да, первый из 2 вопросов. Вот когда, в общем, начинающие художники, иллюстраторы, когда они только-только начинают пытаться создавать что-то свое, сталкиваются с тем, что им кажется, что в мире уже все нарисовано, что невозможно найти что-то свое. Вот могли бы вы дать совет нашим слушателям, как понять, что ты создаешь что-то новое, и что ты нашел вот эту волну, ты ее поймал?
That's a big question. So I do think originality is good. I think that even if you did something that had been done before, you would do it your own way, hopefully. You know how in the olden days when people used to write in cursive by hand, and you're taught how to make certain strokes with the pen. You're taught how to make everything like parallel and consistent. But even so, if you always wrote in that way, eventually your own hand, your handwriting wouldn't look like everybody else's. Your handwriting would be recognizable the same way your face is recognizable. The movements of your body, just drawing in particular, if you're drawing, even if you're drawing in a mode that is commonly used, even if you're drawing in a particular process that is very common, your own marks eventually, if you practice a lot, will start to be personal. They will start to look not like everybody else's work. When you're working digitally, it's, I think, harder to make work that doesn't look like, to make work where you can tell it was done by one particular person. Even a very good illustration these days, sometimes I see digital work and I think, oh, is that by this person whose work I know, and I check and it's somebody I've never heard of. You can't always see the hand now, and it makes it harder to do work that looks different. I think that it's developmentally appropriate. It's fine, I think, and natural and good even when you're starting out to learn by mimicking the way other people work and to try to do something that does look like something you've seen before. I think that's okay. You learn a lot by imitating somebody else. You learn a lot by imitating. And And you can work within a style or a genre and be very good at that style or that genre. And I think that's okay. You know, I don't think everybody needs to do work that looks different from everybody else's. But if you want to do work that looks different from everybody else's, you know, it is an advantage. It is an advantage to have to make work that people, it's very, very hard to get noticed. It's very, very hard not to be boring. You know, it's very hard. You have two projects as an illustrator or any kind of artist. First, it's like, get somebody to look in the first place at what you're doing, get somebody to notice it. And then in the second place, and so that's where being original is helpful, because if people are like, huh? You know, and they're sort of surprised and startled by what they see and they don't immediately understand what they're seeing, that's, you know, that causes them to then look harder. So getting somebody to look at all and not just have their eyes skim over the image is a challenge. And then once you have engaged somebody's attention, then you want to reward that attention. You know, you want to reward a closer look also. So originality is useful in getting noticed. And it's also useful in getting remembered. So there is a value to originality, definitely. So but I do think that if you practice a discipline for long enough, eventually your own voice will assert itself, I think. You know, I think eventually after you've imitated people, you assimilate those influences and synthesize them into a new whole. So I think, yes, there's nothing new under the sun. However, I think that you can do the same thing somebody else did and not do it the same way. I don't know. It's a big question and it's complicated. I mean, it's sort of like the difference between art and craft, right? Like, I mean, you can be a very good craftsman and get work as an illustrator, even if your work isn't original, just because your craft is so good and you're so careful and, you know, and you make something people love to see. Not everything has to be original, but it's good to have an angle. It's good to have a gimmick. I got a lot of work when I first started out because my work didn't look like everybody else's. But I think when you're young, you want to, you know, people see, you know, anyway, I could go on and on about this. The answer is it's complicated.
Ох, Поля, спасибо. Собственно, последний вопрос. Будем заканчивать. Посоветуйте, пожалуйста, какие-нибудь источники для вдохновения. Это может быть там журнал, какие-нибудь книги, можно на английском языке. Возможно, это люди, на которых можно подписаться в Инстаграме.
Well, I'll tell you who I'm looking at these days. I like this guy, Jan Kebi. I think he's really good. Hang on.
Спасибо.
He's one of my favorite illustrators. So these are, but I also really love this painter. She's a painter, and she's great. I love her stuff. This is an older Black artist. It's a beautiful silhouette work. So Bill Traylor was born into slavery in the US, painted these beautiful silhouettes in like house paint on scraps of cardboard. Wonderful artist. I just love his stuff. And Kara Walker is a contemporary artist who also works in a silhouette style. Her work deals with a lot of race issues. She's great. I mean, I told you, Vroom magazine for illustration. This is a British magazine for illustration. I like it very much. This is my favorite. This is my favorite illustration annual. this is an annual competition, but it's also published as a coffee table book in America. That's like the most adventurous and artistic contemporary illustration. So I don't know. Those are just people I'm looking at right now. I'm forgetting tons of people I'm really excited about right now, but those are some people I like. Okay. But you know, you can find inspiration. You don't have to just look at visual art for inspiration. You know, I take a lot of inspiration from music and film and literature and you know, textiles and all sorts of stuff. So just do realize that your mind is like your work is like a garden you're trying to grow, and feeding your head with as much wonderful things that you have not seen before as you can is very important. It's very important. Those are the seeds that you bring to the garden and the water you bring to the garden, and the tools you use to garden with, all of that. That's just what you look at and what you consume. So have your antenna up and try to seek out influences, and then cherish those influences and keep them in your heart, put them under your pillow when you go to sleep at night, and somehow magically, maybe some of that stuff that excites you will seep into your own work. I bet it will.
Оля, огромное спасибо. Это была безумно вдохновляющая встреча. Спасибо, что пришли, поделились своим опытом, вообще рассказали о себе. Вы очень честный человек, вы очень увлеченный человек. Спасибо большое, что пришли к нам сегодня и уделили нам время.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure. It's nice to meet all of you. Okay.
Ну что, друзья, будем прощаться. Еще раз спасибо всем участникам лекции. Будем рады видеть вас на других вебинарах школы «Среда обучения» и встречах вне границ. Обращаю ваше внимание, что следующая лекция по направлению дизайна будет проходить также в 20:30. Мы проговорим о переходном дизайне. Заходите на наш сайт, регистрируйтесь и добро пожаловать в «Среду обучения». Все, всем пока, всем хорошего вечера.